The stranger at the door, the morning air was crisp, and the city was already alive with the sound of traffic and hurried footsteps. People rushed past each other, each trapped in their own worlds, never guessing that on this ordinary day, something extraordinary was about to happen. On the quiet corner of a bustling street stood a small, humble office building. Nothing about it suggested it was connected to one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. Yet behind those simple walls lay the heart of a rapidly growing startup, struggling to keep up with demand, unaware that their fate was about to change forever. A man in a simple gray hoodie, faded jeans, and worn sneakers stood outside the entrance, his hands tucked into his pockets, his beard neatly trimmed but not polished, his eyes calm but observant. There was nothing flashy about him. No security detail, no expensive watch, no air of authority to anyone passing by. He looked like an ordinary middle-aged man, perhaps a software engineer arriving early for work, or maybe a delivery man waiting for someone to open the gate. But this man was none other than SundarPichai, the CEO of Google, and he had chosen to visit this place in complete disguise inside the office. A young receptionist named Ayan was struggling to fix the broken coffee machine. It had been leaking all week, and she had grown tired of apologizing to employees for watery coffee. She didn't notice the man approaching the front desk at first, when she finally looked up. Her voice carried the usual hint of impatience that came from being overworked. "Yes, how can I help you?" she asked without much thought. The man gave a gentle smile. "I'm here for the internship position." His voice was soft but carried an unusual clarity. Ayan raised an eyebrow. Internships weren't supposed to start for another week, and the man before her looked too old to be a student. "You're here for the internship?" she repeated, confused. "Do you have any documents?" He nodded and handed her a folded printout of a resume that had been intentionally formatted to look modest. No titles, no grand achievements, just simple work history at small companies. Ayan scanned it quickly and sighed. "The HR manager isn't in yet. You'll have to wait." She pointed to a wooden bench in the corner. He nodded politely and sat down without a hint of complaint. While others might have shown annoyance or questioned her tone, he simply observed, watching how employees interacted, listening to conversations, noticing how managers walked past without greeting the janitor, seeing how some laughed while others carried silent burdens. He wasn't here just to visit. He was here to understand, to see the raw truth behind the polished reports he received every week. About 30 minutes later, Rena, the HR manager, arrived in a hurry, carrying 2 phones, a half-eaten sandwich, and a folder stuffed with papers. She was clearly stressed. She noticed the man on the bench but didn't think much of him. "You must be the late intern," she said bluntly. Flipping through her folder, "We don't have much time. Follow me." He quietly followed her into a small room. She barely looked at his resume and started firing questions. "Can you handle pressure? Are you willing to work overtime? Do you know how to follow instructions?" He answered calmly, with humility and a touch of humor that made her pause more than once. She wasn't used to candidates who didn't try to impress her with flashy words, yet something about him felt grounded. When she asked about his expectations, he simply said, "I want to learn, and I want to help." It wasn't the kind of answer she heard often. Usually candidates wanted titles, promotions, perks, but this man's words carried quiet conviction. Meanwhile, in the main workspace, employees were gathered around discussing an urgent issue. The company's software had experienced a sudden glitch, causing thousands of users to be locked out of their accounts. Frustration filled the air. Developers were scrambling. Managers were shouting instructions. Everyone blamed someone else. No one seemed to have a clear plan. The disguised Sundar, who had finished the interview, overheard a junior engineer muttering, "If we just rewrote that one function, it would fix everything." But his voice was drowned out by the louder arguments of seniors who were too busy assigning blame to actually solve the problem. Without drawing attention, Sundar approached the young engineer and asked quietly, "What function?" The engineer, surprised by his interest, explained the issue in simple terms. Sundar listened carefully and then suggested a small modification. The engineer hesitated but decided to try it. Within minutes, the system stabilized, accounts were restored, and chaos turned into relief. People cheered, thinking one of the senior developers had found the fix. The junior engineer didn't take credit, but Sundar saw the spark in his eyes as the day went on. Sundar wandered through different departments, Observing how people treated one another when they thought no one important was watching, he saw kindness in small moments, like a Yan giving her lunch to a delivery man who was late for his break, and he saw arrogance in others, like a senior manager humiliating a cleaner for accidentally bumping into his chair. These were the truths he wanted to see, not the filtered reports he usually received. In the late afternoon, as employees prepared to leave, the founder of the startup, a man named Rajesh, arrived for a surprise inspection. He was loud, confident, and quick to judge. When he saw Sundar sitting near the break area, he mistook him for an unproductive intern. "You! What are you doing just sitting there?" he barked. "Do you think we're paying you to relax?" The room went silent. Everyone turned to watch. Sundar slowly stood up, not out of fear but out of respect. "I was observing how things work here," he replied gently. Rajesh laughed mockingly. "Observing, well, this is not a zoo. If you want to survive here, you better prove your worth fast." There was a flicker in Sundar's eyes, not of anger but of resolve. He didn't reveal who he was, not yet. He wanted to see how far their assumptions would go. He wanted to know whether respect here depended on appearances or actions. As the evening light faded, Sundar walked out of the building with a calm smile. No one knew the real reason he had come. No one guessed that the intern they dismissed was one of the most influential tech leaders in the world, and none of them could imagine how their lives were about to change in the days that followed. The next morning, a mysterious email arrived in the company's inbox. Marked as high priority, its sender was unknown. But its message was clear and powerful. The way you treat those who seem unimportant reveals everything about who you are. The entire office buzzed with confusion. No one knew who sent it. But everyone felt uneasy, because deep down, they remembered how they had treated the quiet man in the hoodie. And somewhere in the city, Sundar prepared for the next phase of his silent mission, knowing that what came next would test their hearts even more deeply. Whispers in the hallway. The next morning began like any other, with the soft hum of machines booting up, the aroma of cheap coffee filling the air, and employees dragging themselves to their desks still half asleep. No one realized that their quiet visitor from the day before had returned, dressed the same way, blending into the background as if he belonged. Sundar walked through the entrance with a calm expression, watching how people interacted before the managers arrived. It was in these early, unguarded moments that true behavior often showed itself. Ayan was once again at the reception, scrolling through her phone between answering calls. She looked up briefly when he entered, but didn't recognize him right away. Only after a second did she remember. "Oh, you're the intern," she said, this time with a slightly softer tone. The mysterious email from yesterday had unsettled many, including her. It made her wonder if she had been rude to anyone without realizing. Sundar simply smiled. "Yes. May I sit here for a while before I'm assigned something?" She nodded, a little unsure, then returned to her work. In the development department, whispers had started spreading. Employees speculated about the strange email. Some believed it came from a disgruntled former worker. Others thought it was a trick by the founder to test loyalty. The junior engineer who had worked with Sundar the previous day remained silent. Unsure whether to reveal what had happened, he remembered the way the disguised man had calmly explained the solution, how he never took credit or made a scene. It wasn't normal for interns to carry such clarity. Something about him didn't add up. Yet he kept his thoughts to himself. Around mid-morning, a new challenge erupted. The company's main server suddenly went offline. Leaving customer support overwhelmed with complaints, managers rushed to assign blame. One shouted at the network team. Another accused the interns. Tension escalated as clients began threatening to cancel contracts. Rajesh stormed in with his usual loud presence, his voice echoed through the hallway. "Who is responsible for this mess?" he yelled. No one answered. Sundar stood quietly near a corner. Observing the chaos, he saw experienced engineers fumbling through temporary fixes, trying to patch the problem instead of finding its root. After a few minutes of silence, he walked over to the junior engineer again and asked, "May I see the error logs?" The engineer hesitated. Knowing that technically interns weren't allowed to access critical systems without permission, but something in Sundar's steady gaze gave him confidence. He shared the logs within minutes. Sundar noticed a minor configuration issue in the backup routing, something that had been overlooked for months because everyone assumed it wasn't important. He pointed it out, and the engineer quickly applied the fix. The server came back online smoothly, the support team cheered, and the managers congratulated each other as if they had led the recovery. No one knew the real hero behind the fix except the quiet engineer and the man in the hoodie. After the crisis calmed, Reena, the HR manager, approached Sundar for the first time with a different attitude. She had received feedback about his calm demeanor during the incident. "You seem to understand things better than most interns," she said. Half curious, half cautious, Sundar shrugged lightly. "Sometimes problems just need quiet eyes," her brow furrowed. She wasn't used to such answers. Most interns either boasted or panicked, but this man gave nothing away later that day. Sundar joined the cafeteria crowd for lunch, carrying a simple tray of rice and lentils. While others formed groups based on rank and department, he chose to sit beside a janitor who was eating alone. The man looked surprised but welcomed his company. "No one usually sits here," the janitor said shyly. Sundar smiled. Then maybe today should be different. They talked about simple things: family, life back home, struggles of the job, nothing about technology or power. The janitor opened up about how some employees treated him as if he were invisible, how he sometimes wished someone would just say good morning. Sundar listened with genuine attention, storing every detail in his mind. Meanwhile, in a conference room, Rajesh and the senior managers were discussing expansion plans, unaware that the CEO of Google was sitting a few meters away sharing a quiet meal with their janitor. Their conversation was filled with talk of profits, investments, and flashy partnerships. No mention was made of the employees working extra hours, the interns trying to learn, or the support staff who kept the building running. Sundar understood now that the problem wasn't just technical. It was cultural. As the day drew to a close, something unexpected happened. A team leader named Kavya noticed Sundar helping a new intern fix a code error that even mid-level developers had struggled with. Impressed by his calm teaching style, she decided to assign him a small but critical task for the next day. "If you can handle this," she said, handing him a sealed folder, "it might change the way people see you here." He accepted it with quiet confidence. When everyone left for the day, Sundar remained seated near the reception, gazing at the reflection of the office lights on the glass doors. His mind was already working on something deeper. He wasn't just here to observe anymore. He was beginning to shape the environment quietly, testing hearts, listening to whispers, and learning where real strength lay. Ayan approached him hesitantly. "You're different," she said softly. "You don't act like the others." Sundar turned to her, his expression kind. "Maybe sometimes we see the truth more clearly when we stop trying to be like everyone else." She didn't fully understand, but his words stayed with her long after she went home, and as the building finally fell silent, Sundar knew that tomorrow's task would not only challenge his disguise but also reveal where loyalty and kindness truly existed. Something was shifting beneath the surface, and not everyone would be ready for what was coming next. The silent test begins. The next morning carried a strange tension, like the air before a storm. Employees arrived earlier than usual, their voices lower, their eyes darting toward one another as if expecting something to happen. The mysterious email, the sudden server crash, and the quiet intern who had somehow been around during every key moment were all starting to form an invisible thread in their minds. Some dismissed it as coincidence, others whispered theories in corners, but none truly understood what was unfolding. Sundar, still in his simple hoodie and jeans, entered the office with the same calmness as always, but this time he carried the sealed folder Kavya had handed him the day before. Inside was a set of complex tasks connected to the company's upcoming system migration, a project that had been delayed multiple times due to poor planning and lack of leadership. Kavya approached him not with the typical superiority of a senior employee, but with curiosity. She had observed him closely, noticing how his quiet presence brought order where there had been confusion. "This isn't a usual intern assignment," she said firmly. "If you can complete even half of it by the end of the day, you'll earn everyone's attention." He didn't respond with promises or nervous laughter. He simply nodded, accepted the challenge, and began. His fingers moved across the keyboard with silent precision, not in a hurried way, but with deep focus, as if every line of code had a heartbeat he could hear. As the hours passed, the office buzzed around him, but Sundar remained steady, occasionally pausing to observe interactions rather than just the task at hand. He saw how some team members hoarded knowledge to maintain their importance, while others genuinely tried to support one another. He noticed how some interns were eager to learn but too afraid to ask questions, because the environment punished mistakes more than it encouraged growth. These silent observations shaped his plan. This wasn't just about fixing code. It was about understanding the soul of the company. Around midday, Kavya checked his progress and froze. He had completed the entire set of tasks with clean, elegant solutions that even their most experienced engineers had struggled with for weeks. She couldn't believe her eyes. "Who exactly are you?" she whispered under her breath. Sundar simply smiled. "Just someone who likes solving problems," she wanted to question further. But before she could, Rajesh burst into the room surrounded by senior managers, their faces carrying a mix of urgency and arrogance. They were preparing for an unplanned, high-profile investor visit in the afternoon, an opportunity that could decide the company's future. Rajesh barked instructions without truly listening. "Everyone clean up your stations. Make sure all dashboards are showing positive metrics. No one says anything unnecessary to the investors." His tone carried more fear than leadership. In his rush, he ignored the tired faces of employees who had worked late the previous night, and he dismissed the janitor who was quietly mopping near the entrance, nearly spilling his bucket with a careless push. Sundar watched this moment closely. The small, careless acts often revealed more than grand speeches ever could when the investors arrived. They were greeted with rehearsed smiles and perfectly arranged presentations, but beneath the surface, systems were still fragile and morale was thin. Sundar had a feeling something would go wrong, and it did halfway through the live demonstration. A sudden data sync error caused the main display to freeze. Panic spread instantly. Rajesh's confident mask cracked. Managers whispered frantic instructions. Developers scrambled to fix it. The investors exchanged skeptical glances. Without saying a word, Sundar stepped toward the terminal, blending in like any other intern trying to help. He identified the sync error, applied a temporary bypass, and restored the display in less than a minute. The room breathed again. The investors continued the presentation, unaware that the entire deal had almost collapsed. Kavya watched him in stunned silence. Rajesh, however, took full credit in front of the investors, calling it the team's flawless preparation, never acknowledging the quiet man at the edge of the room. After the investors left, the office filled with nervous excitement. Everyone hoped the visit went well, but Kavya couldn't ignore what she had seen. She pulled Sundar aside, her voice low but serious. "You're not who you say you are. No intern does what you just did." Sundar looked at her calmly. "Maybe titles don't define what someone can do." She shook her head. Conflicted between curiosity and respect, if the founder finds out you're bypassing protocols, he'll fire you without a second thought. Sundar's reply was simple. "Then maybe that will show more about him than about me." Later that evening, while most employees rushed home, Sundar stayed behind as usual. Sitting near the dimly lit reception, Ayayan joined him with 2 cups of tea, handing him one shyly. "You fixed that problem again, didn't you?" she asked. He smiled but didn't confirm. Sometimes it's not about who fixes it, but why they choose to help? She looked at him curiously. "Why are you really here?" For a brief moment, his gaze softened as if he wanted to tell her everything. But then he looked away. "To listen," he said. "To see how people treat each other when they think no one is watching." As they sipped their tea in silence, something unexpected happened. A small group of interns approached Sundar, asking if he could teach them how he solved the tasks earlier. Instead of boasting, he invited them to sit with him, guiding them step by step, breaking down complex ideas into simple explanations. It wasn't just a lesson in coding. It was a lesson in humility and shared growth. For the first time, the interns felt empowered rather than afraid, and Kavya, watching from a distance, felt a shift she couldn't fully explain. But just as the night grew calm, an anonymous message was sent to Rajesh's private inbox, warning him that one of the interns is not who he seems. The tone was sharp, almost threatening. Rajesh's eyes narrowed as he read it. Suspicion crept into his mind, and he decided that the next day he would uncover the truth behind the quiet stranger. And as Sundar walked out into the cool night, unaware of the message, he knew that the real test was about to begin. Not for him, but for everyone who had judged based on appearances, something deep was stirring. And the silent test he had begun was now turning into something far more revealing. The mask begins to crack, the sun rose slowly over the city, painting soft golden light across the glass windows of the small office building. But inside, there was no warmth. A subtle tension had settled overnight, like an invisible fog that everyone could feel but no one could name. Whispers ran through the corridors before the official workday even began. The mysterious intern had once again fixed a major crisis. The investors had left impressed. But questions were multiplying in the shadows. Who was he really? How could someone with no formal title handle critical systems so effortlessly? And why did he never take credit? Sundar walked in as he always did. Hoodie on, hands tucked in his pockets, quiet and observant. But today, he could sense that the atmosphere had shifted against him. Rajesh had spent the night replaying the events in his head. The anonymous email had stirred his paranoia. He wasn't a man who liked surprises, especially when it came from someone he hadn't handpicked. Early that morning, he gathered his senior managers in a closed meeting, his voice sharp. "We need to find out who this intern is," he ordered. "Check his records, his references, everything. No one comes in here and makes us look like fools." His pride was bruised. Not because Sundar had done anything wrong, but because his quiet competence had unintentionally exposed the weaknesses of the leadership. As the managers left to dig through the HR files, Kavya found herself torn. She had grown to respect Sundar's abilities, and more importantly, his humility. He was unlike anyone she had worked with before. Yet she also knew that if the founder's suspicions deepened, things could get ugly. She approached Sundar discreetly near the break area, her voice low. "They're looking into you," she said. "You should be careful." Sundar looked at her, his eyes calm but knowing. "Truth has a way of revealing itself when the time is right." She wanted to warn him more strongly, but something about his quiet confidence made her hesitate as the day progressed. Sundar was given a deliberately difficult task by one of the senior managers, a man named Praveen who disliked how this so-called intern had drawn Kavya's attention. Praveen designed a problem so complex that even their lead architect had failed to solve it weeks earlier, handing it over with a smirk. "Let's see if you're as good as everyone says." His words were coated with sarcasm. Sundar took the challenge without protest, sitting at a corner desk with nothing but his focus. As the hours slipped by, the hum of the office faded in his mind. He dove deep into the structure of the system, not just looking for a fix, but understanding its very core. While Sundar worked, the office dynamics were quietly shifting. Ayan noticed how some employees who once ignored him now observed him with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. The janitor he had once shared lunch with gave him a respectful nod, remembering his kindness. The junior engineers whispered about how he taught them without judgment. Meanwhile, Rajesh's impatience grew. He was used to being the smartest person in the room, and the idea that an unknown figure was quietly outshining him gnawed at his ego. By late afternoon, Sundar completed the impossible task. Not only did he solve it, but he redesigned the process in a way that reduced system load by nearly half, something that could save the company millions if implemented properly. When he presented his solution to Praveen, the man's smugness faltered. His face turned pale as he realized the depth of the work. But instead of praising him, Praveen quickly forwarded the solution to Rajesh. Framing it as a collaborative team effort, Sundar didn't argue. He simply observed, noting who chose honesty and who chose vanity, just as things seemed to settle. Kavya entered the main hall with a worried expression. "Rajesh wants to see you in the boardroom," she whispered to Sundar. The room went quiet. Everyone knew that being called to the boardroom by the founder usually meant trouble. Sundar walked there with steady steps, his heart not burdened by fear, but by a quiet readiness. Inside, Rajesh sat with folded arms, his managers standing behind him like a wall. A projector displayed Sundar's resume on the wall, stripped of titles, showing nothing extraordinary. Rajesh leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Who are you really?" he demanded. "Your resume says one thing, but your work says another. No intern walks in and fixes systems like that. Investors ask questions. My managers ask questions. And I don't like unanswered questions." The room was silent except for the low hum of the air conditioner. Sundar met his gaze without flinching. "I am exactly who I say I am," he replied softly. "Someone who came to learn and help?" Rajesh slammed his hand on the table. "Don't play games with me," he snapped. "I built this company from nothing. I know every trick in the book." Before Sundar could respond, Kavya stepped in, her voice firm but respectful. "Rajesh, with all due respect, maybe it doesn't matter who he is. Maybe what matters is the impact he's making." Her words caused a ripple in the room. A senior manager scoffed. "Easy for you to say. What if he's here to spy, to steal data, to sabotage us?" Suspicion spread like wildfire. Rajesh's eyes narrowed further. "Until I know the truth, I don't trust him," he declared. The meeting ended with tension hanging like thick smoke. Sundar was told he could continue working but would be closely monitored. Some employees looked at him differently when he walked out. Some with fear, some with admiration, some with quiet support. Kavya followed him into the hallway. "I tried," she whispered. Sundar gave a small smile. Truth doesn't need defenders, it just needs time. That night, as most of the office emptied, Sundar stayed back again, this time alone in the quiet glow of computer screens. He thought about everything he had seen over the past few days. The arrogance, the kindness, the fear, the hope. He knew the moment was coming when he would have to reveal why he was truly here. But it had to be at the right time, not through a confrontation, but through a revelation that would shake their assumptions to the core. As he prepared to leave, he noticed someone watching him from the stairwell, a shadow that disappeared when he turned. He knew then that the anonymous email wasn't the end of the scheming. Someone inside wanted to expose him, not for justice, but for personal gain. The game had begun to shift. The mask he wore would soon be tested in ways even he hadn't fully anticipated. The storm within the walls the next morning arrived with an unusual chill. The sky above the city was covered in a blanket of pale gray clouds, and a light drizzle dampened the streets inside the office. The atmosphere mirrored the weather, uneasy, tense, and heavy with unspoken thoughts. Everyone had heard about the heated boardroom confrontation the previous day. Though no one knew the exact details, rumors spread quickly. Some claimed the mysterious intern was a secret government inspector. Others thought he was from a rival tech company. And a few whispered wild theories about him being some kind of genius in hiding whatever the truth was. One thing was clear. The quiet stranger had disrupted the natural order of the workplace. Rajesh arrived earlier than usual. His eyes darkened from lack of sleep. He had spent the night obsessing over the man who refused to fit neatly into any box. His pride refused to accept the possibility that he had underestimated someone. His paranoia had only deepened after another anonymous message appeared in his inbox overnight, this time claiming that the intern was planning to expose the company's internal flaws to the media. The message ended with a chilling line. "He watches, and he judges." Rajesh was not the kind of man to ignore such words. He decided to push the situation to a breaking point, to corner the stranger and force the truth out. Meanwhile, Sundar entered as calmly as ever. His hoodie slightly damp from the rain, his eyes scanning the environment like a quiet observer who noticed everything. He could feel the shift, the way conversations paused when he walked by, the way managers looked at him as if measuring a threat, but beneath the suspicion, he also noticed something else, a growing current of quiet support from those who had worked closely with him. The interns who learned from him greeted him warmly. The janitor gave a respectful nod, and even Kavya stood a little taller when he passed by. Their trust wasn't loud, but it was real. Mid-morning brought the first wave of the storm. Rajesh announced an emergency systems audit in front of the entire office, something that was rarely done unannounced. His tone was sharp. "We're going to test everyone today," he declared. "No excuses, no hiding." His eyes lingered on Sundar for a fraction longer than on anyone else. The managers scrambled to assign tasks, and a complex simulated failure was initiated across multiple departments. Systems that usually worked smoothly suddenly encountered intentional disruptions. Data pipelines froze, backup servers were temporarily disabled, and error logs flooded the dashboards. As chaos erupted, Sundar didn't rush to act. Instead, he quietly walked from one team to another, watching how people responded when pressure arrived. Some blamed others, some panicked, a few tried to find real solutions, but most followed the same broken patterns he had seen before. Within minutes, Kavya found him and whispered urgently, "They're making this look like a random audit." "But it's aimed at you. They want to corner you." Sundar nodded. "Sometimes storms reveal who stands firm and who crumbles," he replied gently. Praveen, the senior manager who had tried to humiliate him before, saw this as his moment. He deliberately misconfigured a part of the system and then loudly accused the interns of causing the issue, drawing attention towards Sundar. "This is exactly what happens when we let unqualified people near critical systems," he shouted, making sure Rajesh could hear. Several employees froze, unsure how to respond. Sundar stepped forward calmly. "May I check the logs?" he asked. Praveen smirked. "By all means, show us your magic." Sundar traced the problem in real time, explaining each step clearly so everyone could understand within moments. He not only exposed Praveen's intentional misconfiguration, but also corrected it in a way that stabilized the entire system faster than anyone expected. The room went silent. Praveen's face turned pale. Kavya stared at him in disbelief, and even Rajesh's jaw tightened as he realized the so-called intern had once again saved them from their own mistakes. But instead of acknowledging his brilliance, Rajesh used the moment to strike. "You seem to know too much for someone with your background," he said loudly. "Either you're hiding something or you've been lying to us." The entire office turned toward Sundar. The silence was thick. All eyes were on him. Sundar stood in the center of the room, calm under the weight of suspicion. "Sometimes," he said softly, "we underestimate people because we only see what they wear, not what they carry within." His words hung in the air like quiet thunder. Some felt their hearts stir, others grew even more suspicious. Rajesh wasn't satisfied. He decided to escalate further, calling for an immediate all-hands meeting in the main hall, something he had never done in such a confrontational way before. As employees gathered, murmurs filled the space. Sundar stood near the back, observing as Rajesh took the stage, his voice loud and theatrical. "We have someone among us who isn't who he says he is," he declared. "Someone who walks in like a shadow and fixes things no one else can. Someone who hides behind humility while watching us." His speech was laced with drama, designed to stir fear and curiosity. Kavya's heart pounded. She wanted to intervene, but didn't know how without risking her position. Ayan bit her lip nervously at the reception. The interns shifted uneasily, unsure whether to defend or stay silent. Rajesh pointed toward Sundar dramatically. "You," he said, "step forward. Tell everyone who you really are, right here, right now." The room held its breath, some expecting him to break, others expecting a grand reveal. Sundar slowly stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. His gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of those who had doubted him and those who had quietly believed. But instead of explaining, he said, "The truth you seek cannot be forced through fear. It is revealed through understanding." His calmness disarmed some, but it only infuriated Rajesh further. "Enough of this poetic nonsense," Rajesh snapped. "Either you tell us, or you leave this building right now." The ultimatum hung in the air like a blade. Kavya took a step forward instinctively, wanting to say something. But before she could, Sundar's eyes softened, as if he had finally decided that the time had come. But instead of revealing everything, he turned to Rajesh and said, "Tomorrow morning, I will tell you who I am, but not here, not like this." His voice carried weight, like someone who wasn't making a request but setting terms. The unexpected confidence made even Rajesh pause. The meeting ended in confusion. Whispers spread like wildfire once again. Tomorrow had suddenly become the day everyone would find out the truth. Employees went home restless, some eager, some afraid. Kavya caught up with Sundar near the exit, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you sure about this?" He smiled gently. "Truth is not something to fear. It is something to live." She didn't fully understand, but she knew something irreversible was about to happen. As the night settled, Sundar stood alone outside the building. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy. He looked up at the dark clouds and took a deep breath, knowing that tomorrow would change everything, not just for the company, but for every single person inside it. The silent mission he began had reached its turning point, and once the truth came out, nothing would be the same again. The unveiling, the following morning, began unlike any other. The entire building seemed to hold its breath. as if the walls themselves were waiting for what was about to unfold. The sky was still gray, heavy with clouds that refused to break, and a quiet wind swept through the streets, carrying a chill that matched the mood inside. Employees arrived earlier than usual, dressed neatly, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes flickering toward the entrance every few seconds. Today wasn't just another work day. Today was the day the stranger in the hoodie would finally reveal who he was. Some came with excitement, others with suspicion, and a few with fear. No one could shake the feeling that their lives were about to shift in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Inside his small corner of the break area, Sundar sat quietly, sipping a warm cup of tea that a Yayan had shyly handed him. She hadn't asked any questions, but the way her hands trembled slightly as she gave him the cup said everything. She was nervous, not because she feared him, but because she didn't know what the truth would mean for everyone. Kavya entered the room moments later, her eyes searching his face. "Are you ready?" she whispered. He nodded slowly. "Truth doesn't need preparation," he replied softly. "It only needs courage to be spoken." As the clock struck 10, Rajesh called for an all-hands meeting in the main hall. His voice boomed through the speakers. "Everyone to the main floor! Now!" He was determined to maintain control, to appear strong in front of his employees. But beneath his confident tone, there was an undeniable edge of unease. He had spent the night preparing for every possible revelation, convinced that the mysterious intern would either confess to being a spy or back down under pressure. He never considered that the truth could be something far more humbling. The main hall filled quickly. Employees stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces a mixture of curiosity and tension. Sundar entered last, walking calmly through the crowd as people stepped aside instinctively. Whispers followed him like a breeze. Kavya stood nearby, her heart pounding as if she were the one about to speak. Ayan clutched the edge of the reception desk. Watching every movement, Rajesh stood on the small stage, his arms crossed, his stare locked onto Sundar. "Come forward," he commanded. Sundar stepped onto the stage with quiet grace. No security guards, no entourage, no fanfare. Just a man in a hoodie standing before a crowd that had judged him, doubted him, admired him, and tried to figure him out. The silence in the room was so complete that even the faint hum of the air conditioning felt loud. Rajesh wasted no time. "You said you'd tell us today," he said sharply. "So speak. Who are you?" For a long moment, Sundar said nothing. His eyes swept across the crowd, meeting their gazes one by one. Not as a leader addressing followers, but as a human seeing other humans. "When I first walked through these doors," he began softly, "no one saw me, not really. Most looked at my clothes, my face, my resume, and decided who I must be. Some were kind, some were indifferent, some were cruel. And that told me more about this company than any report could." His voice was calm, but carried a weight that made everyone lean in closer. He continued, "I came here not to judge, but to see, to understand how people behave when they think no one important is watching." Murmurs spread through the crowd, some realizing what he meant before others did. Kavya's eyes widened as her suspicions finally solidified. Rajesh's jaw tightened. "Enough riddles," he barked. "Who are you?" Sundar turned to him and said clearly, "My name is SundarPichai." The room fell into stunned silence. The kind that doesn't come from confusion, but from disbelief. It was as if the air itself paused. A few people gasped audibly. Others exchanged wide-eyed looks, and Praveen's face drained of color completely. He stepped back as if the floor had shifted beneath him. Kavya's heart raced, not because she was surprised, but because now everything made sense. The elegance of his solutions, his calm presence, his choice to sit with the janitor, his quiet observation of everyone's behavior. Rajesh, however, laughed nervously. "You expect us to believe that?" he said, his voice wavering slightly. "The CEO of Google walks in here dressed like an intern and starts fixing our problems. That's ridiculous." Sundar didn't respond with anger. He reached into his hoodie pocket and handed a small envelope to Kavya, asking her to read it aloud. Inside was an official letter from Google's board, stating his initiative to personally visit rising startups anonymously to understand the culture. The letter carried his signature and the company seal. Kavya's voice trembled as she read it. The reality sank deeper with every word. The room erupted. Whispers turned into exclamations. Disbelief melted into realization. Employees who had dismissed him suddenly remembered their every word, their every action toward him. Those who had treated him with kindness now stood with quiet pride, and those who had looked down on him felt their cheeks burn with shame. Praveen lowered his gaze, unable to meet his eyes. Rajesh tried to maintain his composure, but the weight of his arrogance pressed against him like a heavy stone. Sundar raised his hand slightly and the room fell silent again. "Titles can make people treat you differently," he said, "but kindness, respect, and humility are choices you make before you know someone's title, and those choices reveal your character more than your achievements ever will." His words cut through the air, not harshly, but with a quiet power that made people reflect on their behavior. Then he turned to Rajesh, not with anger, but with a steady gaze. "Your company has incredible talent," he said. "But your culture is broken, people are afraid to speak. Kindness is treated as weakness, and leadership is confused with control. If this continues, no amount of money will save this place." Rajesh opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out for the first time. He had nothing to say. What followed was not a dramatic firing or a public punishment. Sundar simply stepped down from the stage, walked toward the janitor, and shook his hand in front of everyone. "You were the first person who treated me with honesty," he said softly. The gesture struck deeper than any speech could. Kavya felt tears welling up in her eyes. Ayan covered her mouth in shock, and the interns who had once doubted themselves now stood taller, knowing that their quiet ally was one of the most powerful men in the world. In the days that followed, the company changed. Not overnight, but slowly and deeply, the arrogance softened. The quiet voices grew stronger. Managers began listening instead of shouting. And Rajesh, humbled by the revelation, started learning to lead instead of control. Sundar didn't stay to run the company. That was never his intention. He left behind lessons that couldn't be taught through slides or training sessions. Lessons written in the way people treat each other when no one is watching. And as he walked away from the building for the last time, the sky finally cleared, sunlight breaking through the clouds. Sundar looked back once, his face carrying a faint smile, not of triumph, but of quiet hope. The mission had never been about exposing weaknesses alone. It had been about awakening strength, and in that silence after the storm, something within the company had truly begun to change.